All right, so Islamically integrated psychotherapy, unifying fight and professional practice, edited by Karam. So this book invited many scholars in Islamic psychology to express their view about their practice and their experience of working with Islamic ethics as a psychotherapist and psychologist. And I believe that so far this is the best book on the market so far from the perspective of case studies, and case studies again. So each and every chapter, almost like 99% of this book is presented from the perspective of practical application of proposed ways of working within Islamic ethos. And you will find everything Sunni, Sufi, but also Shia approach. And you can be sure that you will have enough information to make informed way in terms of using those methods. Now, for those of you who are not practitioners, who are not psychologists or psychotherapists, I have a good news. This book comes with a handful of really useful ideas in how to reconceptualize your experience of pain or your experience of ibtila in your life. So on page 84, Farah Lodhi, she suggests that using positive thinking within Islamic ethos could work on our self-esteem. And I'm going to quote you a few ways of transforming a negative self-view with Quran and Sunnah. Okay, so some common negative thoughts that we can come across in clinical practice are as follows: I'm a failure. And then you can go back to Quran and say, Allah says the believers are successful, and that's 23 verse 1. You can also think to yourself, no one can help me. And then you can use the opposite of it. It's upon us to help the believer. Surah 30 verse 47. You might think to yourself, I'm too sinful. Look back to Surah Baqarah verse 222. Allah loves those who repent. You might think to yourself, life is too hard. And again, Surah Baqarah verse 185, He wants ease for you. I can't help, you might think to yourself, I can't deal with it. Go back to Surah Baqarah verse 286. Allah will not burden a soul with more than it can bear. You might think to yourself, I am unappreciated. Now go back to Surah 17 verse 70. We have indeed honored the children of Adam. You might think to yourself, I am alone. Well, go back to Quran, Surah 50 verse 16. He is closer to us than a jugal vein. So this is how the author of this chapter suggests to work with your negative thought, but also at the same time, giving yourself a chance to work on your self-esteem. Now, another proposed way of working with by the same author with Islamic ethos and Islamic psychotherapy is to use a heart method, HEART, heart method. Okay, and what's really nice about this book is that it has charts as well. So there you go. This is the proposed heart method. Okay, there you go. There's plenty of charts here actually, and what you can understand by it is that again, working with your way of thinking, with your thoughts, you can stop yourself in the moment and work on your tafakkur, but also on your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whenever you're going through difficult issues in your life, this author suggests stop and ask yourself, what this Quran teaches me about this situation. And then follow it up with another question. When I think of how the Prophet ﷺ handled Taif, can I handle my problem differently? Next question. What spiritual practice that helped me in the past can help me now? Then ask yourself another question. How important is this problem really if I look at the bigger picture? How am I affecting others? Is my behavior aligned with Quranic code of adab? How does my behavior affect my hereafter? And how would Rasulullah react in this situation? So, you know, this is what we call building your internal critique, actually no, internal supervisor. Yeah. So if you can get yourself into asking yourself what if and how aligned it is, whatever is happening right now with me with adab of Prophet ﷺ and Quranic guidance, you might find yourself on the best path of Islamic healing. Now, this book, as I said, is full of case studies, and those case studies are really brave. I mean, almost no stone unturned. I mean, this book talks about issues in our community which are still taboo. So issues about sexual issues between couples, issues about polygamy and how it's experienced by women as a betrayal, emotional betrayal as well. This book presents case studies about sexual trauma and how it affects further relationship. It talks about power balance and financial responsibilities and how women in our community tend to think that this is all men's responsibility to support us. Yes, fair enough. But again, this book goes into details of explaining on examples of, for instance, Khadija and Prophet ﷺ, how sometimes things can be balanced, and they had been balanced. This book talks about racism within our community, about ruqya, how we tend to, as Muslims, how we tend to use it as a cover-up of deeper issues. It talks about polygamy, as I said as well, plus many more. Okay, and it's impossible for me to quote you all those case studies here. You just need to dip into that book, inshallah. Now, what's really good about this how to practice Islamic psychology book is also the fact that it gives you a clues about heart of Islamic psychology. And the really nice definition that I came across, written by Abdullah Rahman about Islamic psychology, is as it follows. I'm going to quote it for you. I do not consider what I do as an integration of Islam into psychotherapy as much as I consider my practice of psychotherapy as a translation of a concept relating to the soul and to healing from Islamic tradition into the language of psychology with a therapeutic process. So, you know, the question of top-down and bottom-up approach is still very valid where we are right now in terms of researching Islamic psychology. But this is a really clear indication to the fact that we as Muslims, thanks to Golden Era, we have a vast heritage in terms of psychology as we know it today. We probably could call it indigenous psychology. However, this is how some of us in Islamic practice of psychology, psychotherapy, and counseling, we tend to think of ourselves. And Abdullah Rahman was brave enough to put it in words. This book also will give you a manual of how to use different methods, because where we are right now, we don't have clarity how to practice. We still sort of developing it. And it's not to say that it is a freestyle. It is rather, you know, an open and a field, a platform open to a different interpretation. So I've presented to you a heart method already, but the method which I appreciate probably the most in my practice is developed by Kashivazi and Hack, I think. And what they suggest to work with emotions, they call it ihsas, work with spirituality, they call it nerves, sorry, they call it ruh, the nerves, they call it working with behaviors, and akal, working with your intellect. And they have it all really presented lovely in this table here, plus more. This method is actually based on the approach which was probably developed by Ghazali. Al-Ghazali, he developed a really good overview about our selfhood. And again, I can't quote to the whole book here. There's another chapter, there's another table here, as in manual on how to apply it in your own life. But I'm going to quote you some bits and pieces. So you might find yourself having maladaptive behaviors, maladaptive thoughts, emotions, and maladaptive belief systems, which are normally conditioned by your past experiences of growing up, meaning in your childhood. And this method of Khashoggi and Khan, this method presents to you probably the roots of this maladaptation. So you might think to yourself, I am incompetent, or I look goofy, or I am probably mess up. So by nerves level, you are right now presenting avoidance behavior. By ihsas, meaning by your emotional maladaptation, you are probably struggling with inner shame and maybe secondary fear. On spiritual level, you are experiencing exhaustion and fatigue. Now, you might think to yourself, what people think of me is really important to me. If I do not perform well, people will not like me. If I am not interesting, people will not want to be around me. So in the first example, it was all about your image. And over here, we are sort of going back into self-sabotaging thoughts and belief systems about our importance, our esteem. And by this theory, at the nerves level, you experiencing behavioral maladaptation of over-concentrating yourself on pleasing others. Emotionally, you are dependent on others, and spiritually, you are intentional, incongruent with your religion, because you are sort of over-concentrating yourself on creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rather than concentrating on what is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make out of my behavior. Okay, so I think you know, those sort of examples, they beautifully written in this book. They can sit you down and make you contemplate and maybe possibly increase your self-esteem, and if you are a practitioner, give you an idea how to work with it. I said this book is full of case studies, and there is a beautiful chapter which talks about how practitioners use the stories of the prophets to help their clients. In another example, it talks about also mindfulness, and it uses using idea of dua rather than Buddhistic approach to working to please or quieten your nafs only. And until that point, I sort of agree with this approach. However, I also believe that this book is brave, not to show you very conscious of what it's presenting, but it's very brave. because it's presenting Dua Arafah, which is based on Shia tradition. Now, for those of you just like me who are following Ahl Sunnah al Jama'ah, you are inclined towards Sunni approach to this deen, you probably want to reread this chapter and maybe find a similar approach in the tradition of majority, which is Ahl Sunnah al Jama'ah. And the reason why I'm saying it's really brave, because encouraging people to practice something which is not sahih, can have a serious implication on our akhirah, on our day of akhirah. So please do reread this chapter very carefully. Now, this book also gave itself an effort to go into contemplating on protocols. As I said, we are still open platform to practices. There is nothing set in stone yet. However, Hafara Lotfi, she suggested that working within Islamically inspired method, you want to base your practice on taqwa and tawakkul, meaning God consciousness and trusting God. You also want to work with compassion, which is very close to compassion based schema in psychology, but from our perspective on the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You want to also, accordingly to this proposal, work with emotions, acknowledge difficult emotions and normalize them. You also want to reframe. Reframing is really important, and I already quoted to you how you can reframe those thoughts and belief systems. You also want to work with dua, because that is direct method of asking your Lord to help you with whatever situations you are in. You also want to work with salah and meditation. I would change it into tafakkur, because there's so much big confusion going on right now about meditation. So it's probably best to clarify it. Also, the last point, accordingly to Faralothi, is to implement Quranic code of conduct. So again, working on your adab and akhlaq. Now, again, because of time, I don't have enough time to give justice to this book, but I'm sure that you are going to be satisfied with the content of this book, because it's really practical, and it tries to give justice to theory, and as well as a real experience of what it is like to be an Islamically inclined therapist. So you can again expect work on self-worth, work on negative thoughts, work with prophetic stories, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala names, as well as Quran, dua, and prayers. Now, I hope you will reach out to this book, inshallah, and let me know what is your experience of this 300 pages here, and everything is backed up by research. Each chapter has its reference, and I hope to see you in another video on my YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and like this video, subscribe to AJS Therapy, and inshallah I look forward to see you in another video.